Let's kill the fairy tale before it even begins. You've heard it 1,000 times. Jeff Bezos, the scrappy dreamer, coding Amazon from a dingy garage with nothing but hustle and vision. But what they don't tell you is that this garage came with a $250,000 investment from his wealthy parents. That's right. Mommy and Daddy didn't just cheer from the sidelines. They bought his front row seat to capitalism's blood sport. Jeffrey Preston Bezos didn't bootstrap his way to the top. He launched Amazon in 1994 not on ramen noodles and grit, but with insider knowledge from his Wall Street days, a Rolodex packed with elite contacts, and capital most Americans couldn't imagine scraping together in 10 lifetimes. This wasn't a Cinderella story. It was a surgical corporate strike from a man who saw the future and planned to own it. From day one, Bezos didn't dream of selling books. He dreamed of domination. Amazon wasn't built to coexist, it was built to conquer. He priced his books so low it bled independent stores dry, willingly taking losses just to suffocate his competitors. And once they were dead, he jacked up the prices. That's not competition, that's scorched earth warfare with a barcode. While Silicon Valley preached disruption, Bezos practiced annihilation. But don't mistake that bald dome and awkward laugh for charm. This isn't a Marvel hero origin story. This is the rise of a billionaire who would turn warehouses into sweatshops, space into a playground, and workers into data points. A man who made a fortune so vast he could lose billions in a single day and not even flinch, and the world just clapped along. In 2021, his net worth hit $246 billion. That's not money. That's a number so monstrous it stops being real. While everyday Americans ration insulin, skip meals, and drown in rent hikes, Bezos lounges on a $500 million yacht shadowed by its own support yacht because one floating palace just wasn't enough. But the real Bezos story? It's not about brilliance, it's about brutality. It's about crushing unions, dodging taxes, silencing critics, and launching billionaires into space for PR while Amazon workers literally died on the job. And it gets uglier. Because when you peel back the polished PR, the smiling photo ops, the faux humble interviews, what you find is a man playing Bond villain with real-world stakes. Space used to be a frontier for dreamers, scientists, explorers. Now, it's a billionaire's playground. And Jeff Bezos wants to own the sandbox. Blue Origin. The name sounds like a fresh start, but the mission reeks of vanity. This wasn't about humanity's progress. It was about flexing the kind of wealth that could launch you into orbit while your employees can't afford health insurance. And oh, did Bezos flex. On July 20th, 2021, he strapped himself into a phallic rocket, grinned like a comic book villain, and took an 11-minute joyride to the edge of space. He thanked Amazon workers for funding it, the very same workers who were urinating in bottles to keep up with delivery quotas. Fast forward to 2025, and Blue Origin is still his personal ego parade. The NS-34 launch? It wasn't astronauts on board, it was crypto moguls and influencers chasing clout. A spectacle dripping with excess, tickets rumoured at $1.5 million apiece. And Bezos? He stood there smirking, knowing he'd turned space travel into the next yacht club for the elite. Let's talk about the obscene numbers. $246 billion. That's Bezos' net worth as of this year. Think about that. $250 billion in one man's hands. He could wipe out homelessness in America multiple times over and still have money for his floating palaces. Instead, he throws fortune after fortune into pet rockets and robot yachts. Why? Because he can. This isn't about curiosity or innovation. It's about immortality. Bezos wants his name etched into the stars, not because he cares about humanity's future, but because Earth isn't big enough to contain his empire anymore. And the cruel irony? Blue Origin's success isn't built on genius alone. It's funded by every exhausted Amazon employee who's ever pulled a 12-hour shift for pennies compared to the boss' obscene wealth. He launched himself out of the stratosphere on the backs of people who can't afford a day off. But Bezos doesn't see workers. He sees data. He sees units. He sees efficiency ratings. And when a worker dies in one of his warehouses, it's just a blip in the algorithm. The villainy is not subtle, it's written in the headlines. But what happens when the spotlight moves from the skies to the ground? When the cameras turn toward the brutal, soul-crushing machine of Amazon's warehouse empire? That's when the mask slips and the real monster shows his face. Step into an Amazon warehouse and you're not walking into the future, you're stepping into a dystopian nightmare built by algorithms and ruled by fear. Bezos didn't just revolutionize retail, he industrialized suffering. Behind every Prime delivery is a worker moving faster than humanly possible, monitored by machines, punished by metrics, and disposable the moment they slip. The stories aren't whispers, they're sirens. Workers collapsing from heat exhaustion. Ambulances called to warehouses so often they sit outside like part of the architecture. In 2021, a worker in Bessemer, Alabama, spoke up. "We're not robots," he said. But to Amazon, that was the problem. Robots don't complain. Robots don't unionize. Robots don't demand dignity. Amazon has poured millions into union busting. Leaked training videos instructed managers on how to detect early warning signs of collective organizing, like too much friendliness between workers. Too much talking, too many questions. That's not security, that's surveillance. And it's all backed by a man who wants absolute control. In Staten Island, the union movement sparked like fire on dry brush. And Bezos, he deployed lawyers, consultants, corporate propaganda, all to stop warehouse workers from gaining the most basic rights. Why fight so hard? Because even one crack in the system threatens the whole empire. The facts don't lie. Amazon settled multiple lawsuits alleging unsafe conditions. They've been cited for failing to report injuries. In one case, a worker's death went unreported to OSHA for over a month. And even now, as of August 2025, multiple labor probes are still open. It's not just bad optics, it's systemic abuse. And through it all, Bezos keeps building. More warehouses, more bodies, more automation. Amazon's patented wristbands track employee hand movement to within millimeters. Take too long to scan a package, the system flags you. Go to the bathroom twice, you're risking your job. This is not a workplace, it's a panopticon, designed by techies, enforced by fear, ruled by silence. But what does Jeff Bezos do while this hellscape burns beneath his empire? He parties on super yachts, he courts heads of state, he waltzes through Venice in a white tuxedo at a wedding so opulent it sparked riots in the streets. June 2025. Venice, Italy. A floating city that's been sinking for centuries, now drowning in billionaires, bodyguards, and billionaire delusions. Because this wasn't just any wedding. This was Jeff Bezos marrying Lauren Sanchez in a city suffocating under the weight of his money. The guest list? A grotesque roll call of the rich and untouchable. Tech titans, Hollywood elites, Wall Street snakes. The venue? The historic Palazzo Centurioni Gallo, sealed off from the public like a fortress. Locals couldn't get to their own homes. Tourists were shoved aside. Protesters flooded the square, chanting in 5 languages. "Eat the rich" wasn't a meme that day. It was a war cry. Why? Because outside the champagne-soaked walls, Venice was burning. Inflation ravaged the country. Homelessness spiked. Climate collapse sent floods into the streets. And there was Jeff Bezos, dressed in a spotless tuxedo that cost more than most Italians earn in 6 months, smiling like a Roman emperor on his coronation day. And Lauren? Draped in designer opulence, arriving by luxury boat with a media team trailing behind her like disciples. The cameras loved it. Bezos loved it more. But the people? The people rioted. What was meant to be a royal affair turned into an international headline. Bezos' wedding ignites class war in Venice. Local unions protested. Anti-capitalist groups clashed with riot police. Even climate activists stormed the canals, furious that the mega yachts were belching diesel into a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Venice lagoon hadn't seen chaos like this in decades. And Bezos? He didn't flinch. He waved from the balcony, wine in hand, as if he couldn't hear the chants echoing through the alleyways. "Billionaires out of Venice. The city is not for sale." But to Bezos, everything is for sale. He owns the media, he owns the delivery system, he owns the satellites, and now he owns the narrative. A wedding of astronomical luxury spun as romance and ambition, when it was really the middle finger of the ultra-rich pointed directly at the working class. But if you think this was his most shameless moment, think again. Because while Venice was tearing itself apart outside his wedding gates, back in the United States, another firestorm was brewing. One that struck at the very heart of free speech, journalism, and the illusion of truth. Freedom of the press. The so-called Fourth Estate, a pillar of democracy. But what happens when that pillar is bought by a man with more money than God, and even less accountability? 2013, Jeff Bezos buys the Washington Post for $250 million, chump change for a man who makes that before breakfast. But this wasn't a financial investment. This was narrative control. They said he'd stay hands-off. They said it was a philanthropic gesture. But here's the truth. When billionaires buy newspapers, they don't do it for journalism. They do it for protection. And sure, for a while, the Post kept its edge. But slowly, strategically, you saw it shift. You saw the angles soften, the scrutiny fade, the fangs dull. Stories that painted Amazon or Blue Origin in an unflattering light? Buried. Headlines that should have screamed outrage were rewritten with surgical neutrality. Then came the leak. In 2022, internal emails surfaced. Editors were caught discussing how Amazon-related stories needed careful handling. Phrases like executive pressure, publisher alignment, and don't upset the boss were littered through private memos. And while Bezos denied ever interfering directly, the shadow of his wallet loomed over every keystroke. And when reporters tried to speak up, careers stalled. Assignments vanished, whistleblowers blackballed, journalism became performance art, carefully curated for the comfort of its owner. Let's be clear, the Washington Post didn't become a right-wing rag or a propaganda machine. No, the manipulation was far more elegant. It was omission. It was prioritization. It was the slow erosion of trust, cloaked in polished headlines and hollow op-eds. But the tipping point came in 2024. A Post columnist began investigating labor conditions inside Amazon's drone fulfillment division. Specifically, reports of workers injured by malfunctioning AI sorting arms. The story was killed, not delayed. Killed. The journalist was reassigned to write tech fluff about smart appliances, and when independent media ran the expose instead? The Post didn't mention it. Not once. Critics erupted. Is this a newspaper or a PR firm? One former editor wrote on Substack. The Post's credibility plummeted. Subscriptions dropped. And yet Bezos remained silent. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he didn't have to. When you own the press, silence is your loudest weapon. It's not that Bezos fears bad headlines. He fears the loss of narrative control. That's why Blue Origin has its own media wing. Why Amazon funds entire think tanks. Why he's been spotted quietly buying up smaller media ventures under shell companies. Because Bezos doesn't just want to deliver your groceries, he wants to deliver your truth. But even with the media in his pocket, the labor unrest boiling beneath Amazon's empire was becoming too loud to hide. Unions, whistleblowers, lawsuits, and the most damning of all, historic multi-million-dollar settlements that confirmed what the public already suspected, that behind the tech sheen and corporate smiles, something dark was festering. They say money can't buy happiness, but it can buy silence. It can buy fear. And in Jeff Bezos' empire, it buys both, by the truckload. Let's talk numbers. Not the shiny revenue figures Amazon loves to parade. Let's talk about the settlements. In 2023, Amazon agreed to pay a $30 million fine for illegally surveilling warehouse workers and collecting voice and video data from Ring devices without consent. That's not speculation. That's the Federal Trade Commission. That's legal fact. But here's the kicker. $30 million to Bezos? That's like you dropping a dime in the gutter and walking on without noticing. He didn't blink. And that's just one. Another $61. $7 million was paid out after the Department of Labor uncovered that Amazon had withheld tips from its flex drivers, stealing earnings from people already scraping by on gig wages. Let that sink in. While Bezos was experimenting with space tourism and buying a $500 million yacht, his company was robbing drivers of tips. And it gets darker. As union momentum surged, Amazon escalated its tactics from aggressive to dystopian. Surveillance vans parked outside organizing meetings. Fake social media accounts flooded platforms to sway public opinion. Internal documents referred to labor organizers as threat actors. And if that sounds like CIA language, it's because it was. Amazon even hired former intelligence agents to track labor threats. This wasn't security. It was war. In 2024, after a successful unionization effort in Staten Island, Amazon launched a scorched earth campaign. Leaders were suddenly terminated for performance. Schedules were changed to scatter sympathetic workers. New hires were vetted for ideological fit. And when journalists requested comment, silence. Or worse, carefully lawyered deflections about employee safety and compliance. But the most chilling development came in 2025. Amazon was caught piloting a new internal system that flagged warehouse workers for attitude metrics. What does that mean? It means their AI was monitoring facial expressions, speech tone, and posture, ranking employees by how cheerful, compliant, and obedient they appeared. Smile too little? You're flagged. Speak up? You're a disruption. They called it efficiency. We call it totalitarianism. And while all this unfolded, Jeff Bezos was busy sunbathing on the deck of his $500 million yacht, complete with a helipad, ballroom, and its own support yacht just to carry the jet skis. A floating city of decadence, drifting above a sea of exploited labor. This isn't capitalism. This is extraction. This is parasitism dressed as progress. And yet the world still applauds, still buys, still clicks, still subscribes because the system was built for him to win and us to lose. But even a man this rich, this ruthless, isn't untouchable. There was one moment when the emperor's armor cracked, when the perfect image, Bezos the genius, the titan, the untouchable, was shattered by something grotesquely human. It was the moment the world saw behind the curtain, and it wasn't pretty. Jeff Bezos, the world's richest man, the architect of e-commerce domination, the spacefaring mogul, the warehouse warlord, and suddenly a man with his pants down, literally. The National Enquirer dropped the bomb. Bezos had been cheating on his wife, Mackenzie Scott, with TV personality Lauren Sanchez. But it wasn't just the affair. It was the sexts, the private texts, the photos, including the now infamous below-the-belt selfie. The richest man in modern history reduced to a scandal straight out of a high school group chat. It should have been a punchline, but it became a firestorm. Because Bezos didn't go quietly. He came out swinging, accusing the Enquirer's parent company, AMI, of blackmail and extortion. He claimed they threatened to release the explicit photos unless he publicly declared the coverage was not politically motivated. And why would it be? Because Bezos owns the Washington Post, the same outlet that had been hammering Saudi Arabia for the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The rabbit hole deepened. Bezos hinted, without naming names, that foreign actors might be involved, that his phone could have been hacked, that this wasn't just a tabloid story, it was a geopolitical power play. Intelligence agencies started poking around, experts raised eyebrows, the media exploded. Suddenly, it wasn't just about the affair, it was about surveillance, about privacy, about corruption, about how vulnerable even the world's most powerful man could be. But let's not kid ourselves. Jeff Bezos didn't play the victim, he turned the scandal into a spotlight. He got a divorce, quietly paying Mackenzie Scott a jaw-dropping $38 billion, and then made his public relationship with Sanchez part of the Bezos brand. She became his plus one at every event, a staple in his new image, not just mogul, but celebrity tycoon, tanned, jacked, grinning like Bond on a private island. And as for the sexting scandal, it didn't ruin him. It rebranded him. The tabloids didn't destroy Jeff Bezos, they humanized him, temporarily. Because just like that, the story shifted. The headlines moved on. And Bezos, he used the chaos to solidify power, to purge critics, to reshape his image. But behind that sculpted smirk was a man who now knew, even with billions, even with satellites, yachts, and media machines, you're never truly untouchable. Someone's always watching, always waiting to pull a thread. And while the public chuckled over pixelated photos and late-night punchlines, the machinery of his empire kept grinding. Louder, colder, more ruthless than ever. And what do you do after a scandal like that? If you're Jeff Bezos, you double down. On image, on power, on scale. Which brings us to the final flex of this man's monstrous wealth, one so vast, so theatrical, it makes Versailles look modest. What happens when you run out of things to buy? If you're Jeff Bezos, you build something so stupidly big it breaks bridges, literally. 2022, Rotterdam. The Dutch city famous for its centuries-old Koningshaven Bridge. That's when word leaked. Bezos had commissioned a mega yacht so massive, so grotesquely oversized, that it couldn't pass under the bridge. His solution? Dismantle it. The yacht, codenamed Y721, measured over 400 feet long. A three-masted Leviathan estimated at $500 million. Complete with its own support vessel, helipad, and rumored missile defense system. Because nothing says luxury like military-grade paranoia. The backlash was instant. Rotterdam residents threatened to pelt the yacht with rotten eggs if the bridge was touched. Memes flooded the internet. For once, the world wasn't laughing with Bezos. They were laughing at him. And yet, it didn't matter. Even after the plans to dismantle the bridge were scrapped, the message had already been broadcast to the world. Jeff Bezos lives in a reality where your history, your heritage, your city, is just an obstacle between him and his next vanity project. But the obscene flexes didn't stop there. In 2025, during a single brutal week in the stock market, Bezos lost $14 billion. $14 billion. Gone. And what did he do? He posted beach selfies with Sanchez. He laughed at a yacht club gala in Saint-Tropez. Because when you're worth $246 billion, losing $14 billion is a speed bump, not a crisis. This isn't capitalism. This is a fever dream of post-human wealth, where money no longer buys things. It buys gravity. It bends the world around you. And when nations began cracking down with tech tariffs, trying to claw back some power from Amazon's monopolistic grip, Bezos didn't negotiate. He retaliated. Overnight, prices spiked for international sellers on Amazon. Import delays became the norm. He weaponized the supply chain. And while small businesses choked, Amazon's private fulfillment network only got faster, cheaper, and more exclusive. Bezos doesn't play by market rules, he writes them. And yet, through it all, the smiling interviews continue. The TED Talks, the spaced dreams, the inspirational posts about customer obsession and lean thinking, as if the man standing atop a mountain of crushed workers and crushed unions is just another tech visionary. As if the emperor isn't naked and cloaked in gold. Jeff Bezos has become the perfect villain, untouchable, unapologetic, undefeated. And what's worse, he didn't break the system, he mastered it. But every empire has its cracks, every story has its end, and every villain has a reckoning. Legacy, the final drug of the powerful. Once you've conquered markets, crushed labor, flown to the edge of space and back, what's left? Immortality. Not through blood or DNA, but through myth. And Jeff Bezos is building his. He's not just investing in rockets anymore. He's funding clock towers that tick for 10,000 years. No, that's not a metaphor. The clock of the long now is real. A massive underground monument in West Texas that Bezos has sunk millions into. Designed to outlive empires, outlast countries, outlive you. Why? Because when you've consumed the world, the only thing left is time. But while Bezos plays God in the desert, the fires he helped ignite are closing in. Climate collapse, labor revolts, antitrust investigations, and a public that's no longer in awe but in rage. In 2025 alone, Amazon faced a global coalition of labor unions for the first time in its history. South America, Europe, Southeast Asia, coordinated strikes, coordinated demands, coordinated rage. Bezos responded with what he always does: automation, surveillance, buyouts, and silence. But the cracks are forming. Politicians once too scared to challenge him are now dragging Amazon into hearings. Antitrust cases are no longer fringe fantasies, they're active threats. Even shareholders, finally spooked by public perception, have started asking the unthinkable: is Bezos becoming a liability? But Jeff? He doesn't flinch. He's already halfway off the planet. With Blue Origin now building orbital platforms, literal Bezos-branded space stations, the narrative is clear. If Earth collapses, he won't be here to answer for it. This isn't legacy, it's escape. Bezos once said, "We're going to have to leave this planet. We're going to run out of resources." What he didn't say was, "We'll run out because people like him use them up." And while Amazon continues to gobble up logistics, cloud computing, AI, and military contracts, yes, military contracts, Bezos sits above it all. No longer just a tycoon, not even a businessman, but a sovereign, a self-appointed monarch of the New World Order, unelected, unaccountable, untouchable. And yet, there's one thing Bezos can never automate, never privatize, never upload to the cloud: judgment, not from courts, not from regulators, from us. The people whose lives he's altered, industries he's dismantled, futures he's rewritten, the people who make the deliveries, who breathe the warehouse dust, who burn beneath the weight of his ambition. The reckoning isn't coming from above, it's rising from below. And now, we stand at the edge, not of space, not of science, but of submission. Jeff Bezos is no longer just a man, he's a machine, a system, a self-reinforcing loop of profit, power, and untouchable privilege. His image beams from billion-dollar satellites, His voice echoes through millions of Alexa devices. His algorithms choose what you buy, what you see, even what you believe. He doesn't need to run for office, he already governs your day. Wake up, Amazon device. Order groceries, Amazon Fresh, watch TV, Prime Video, host your website, and if you work in a warehouse, he owns your time, your bathroom breaks, your heartbeat. This isn't innovation, it's colonization. Digital, psychological, economic. And the question isn't how did we let this happen, it's do we let it continue? Because here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. We made him. Every time we clicked buy now, every time we chose convenience over conscience, every time we scrolled past a headline about union busting, injury settlements, surveillance contracts, drone tracking, or another soul-crushing report about an Amazon worker dying in silence, we fed the beast. Jeff Bezos didn't build this alone. We helped. And that's why he's winning. Not because he's a genius, but because he's the perfect villain for our age. Slick, sanitized, PR polished. A man who sells you a $9 spatula with same-day shipping while plotting lunar colonies in private. He's not hiding. He's waving from the yacht. And still we excuse it. We admire it. We envy it. But what if we stopped? What if the next time Bezos launched a vanity rocket into space, it was met not with applause, but protest? What if warehouse workers didn't just unionize, but walked? What if we finally understood that the cost of one man's obscene wealth is everyone else's quiet poverty? Because no amount of TED Talks, no tear-jerking commercials, no recycled cardboard packaging can change this one brutal fact. Jeff Bezos got rich off a system designed to keep you small, and he's betting right now that you won't do a damn thing about it. So, here we are, 40 minutes in. The mask's off, the empire's exposed. And the final question remains. Do we let this villain win? Or do we finally pull the plug? You know the answer.